My name is Robert Kennedy. I'm an antique clock collector. This is my 35 years of collection. First, I will tell you how this clock collection started in my life. During 1920, my grandfather was working for the Britishers at Moonar Tea Estate. He was a head clerk for 64 small estates. By seeing his dedication towards his job, the Britishers gifted him a Chevrolet car and an Ansonia clock. This was the clock which was gifted to my grandfather. The story was told to me by my father. I have never seen my grandfather. My father used to tell me lots and lots of stories about this clock. From my childhood onwards, this clock was in my house. Very often, he used to proudly say, "Son, this clock was gifted to my father by Dorai." Those days, Britishers were addressed as Dorai. Being a boy, hearing the story repeatedly, I somehow got attached to this clock. I really started respecting this clock. It was during 1982. I was in my 12th standard. That was the period battery clocks started dominating our country. My father got a battery-operated clock, which requires no winding. It really excited my father because my grandfather's clock has to be winded up every 8 days once. It was a routine job for my father. So my father removed my grandfather's clock and fixed the battery clock. As a boy, I was watching all these things. After 2 days, I went to my father's room. I told him, "Daddy, this clock doesn't thrill me at all. Our old grandfather's clock was so majestic. Can you please refix the clock?" But my father told me, "Son, this is the latest invention. This is an electronic clock." He also mentioned the old Tamil slogan, "Pazhayana kalidalum, pudiyana pugidalum." That means we have to scrap the old ideas and missions and accept the latest technology. But my father's reply did not convince me. With his permission, I took my grandfather's clock and I fixed it in my bedroom. From that day onwards, this clock became my real companion. I used to watch the pendulum swinging for hours together. After 4 or 5 months, I bought a broken pendulum clock from a scrap shop just for 20 rupees. With the help of a carpenter and a local clocksmith, I made the clock to run. When I brought the clock to my house, I really had a feeling that I have found a real partner for my grandfather's clock. Like this, my collection started, and today I have around 2,200 wind-up mechanical clocks in perfect working condition. From the beginning of mankind, the concept of timekeeping was always there. Man has invented so many timekeeping devices, but all those timekeeping devices, early timekeeping devices, required frequent human factor. During 1637, the great Italian scientist Galileo invented the first ever pendulum clock. But unfortunately, he could not complete his clock within his lifetime. After 19 years of Galileo's death, Christian Huygens, a Dutch scientist, during 1659, completed the clock. This was one of the major inventions in mankind. Now I'll show you some of the historic clocks in our collection. This is the oldest clock in our possession. This is a handmade clock from England. The age of the clock is 285 years. This belongs to the first generation of pendulum clocks. This clock only shows the time, but it doesn't chime because that period, chiming feature was not invented. The speciality of the clock is, even after 285 years, it is in perfect running condition and shows time precisely. It has an 8-day spring-driven wind-up mechanism. This is the smallest pendulum clock ever made during 1860s. The height of the clock is only 1.5 inch. You might be wondering where the pendulum is. The clockmaker has fixed the pendulum just behind the dial of the clock. This clock is a Swiss-made clock. Once you wind the clock fully, the clock will run for 8 days continuously. After that, you have to wind the clock again. As time moved on, the pendulum clocks became a bit more advanced. During 1840, an American clockmaker, Aaron Crane, started building clocks which required winding only once a year. He named it as anniversary clock. This created a revolution in the pendulum clock history. Though the Americans invented the technology, the Germans excelled in this engineering. German anniversary clocks became world famous, and those days it was also a status symbol. This is some of our German and American anniversary clocks in our collection. This is another fascinating clock. When I did a research about this clock, I really got excited. During World War II, this clock was fixed in the American fighter planes Grumman F-6F Hellcat. 70% of American Navy's airstrikes was successfully done by this fighter plane Hellcat. This clock was the most accurate wind-up clock produced by the finest clockmaker, Waltham. During the war, very often, the difference between life and death is a matter of timing for the fighter pilots. Their clocks has to be very, very accurate. It was a standing order for the pilots of those days. The moment they entered the cockpit, they have to wind the clock. This clock has been fixed in the cockpit in the left-hand corner. So for sure, the pilot of those days must have used his left hand to wind the clock. While the Americans were keeping time in their aircraft clock across the Atlantic Ocean, the Russians were using the solid clock in their submarines. The Russian clockmakers were so confident, they built the solid mechanical wind-up clock as a concealed unit which requires no service at all. This clock is with me for the past 27 years, has never failed, and shows time precisely to today's digital standards. This is my favorite clock in my collection. This is a small, daily winding tabletop alarm clock. When I was in my college hostel, very few had alarm clocks in their room. In the entire hostel, this was everyone's favorite because it has never failed to alarm. This clock is with me for the past 32 years. Only 4 or 5 times I must have serviced. Such a rugged, reliable clock. Do you know who made this clock? I will tell you a little later. Before that, I would like to show an iconic clock. Big Ben, which we all know as a huge iconic clock tower in London, is not the name of the tower, but the name of the manufacturer who made the clock. This huge iconic clock weighs around 15 tons, and the chiming tone roars across the streets of London even today. Parliament commissioned this clock during 1859. Big Ben, who made this huge clock, has also produced my favorite clock, which weighs only 2 kilos. And my favorite clock was produced during 1930s. I take pride in telling that in our collection, we have all the wind-up alarm clocks which was produced by Big Ben. Up to 1890, pendulum clocks were marked as a rich man's product. During 1892, Japanese clock manufacturers Sikosha and Meiji entered into pendulum clock production. By that time, the British and German manufacturers had established their products throughout the world very strongly. Japanese found it very difficult to promote their clocks. Moreover, Japanese clocks were marked as inferior products compared to the Germans and English clocks. To compete with the giants, Japanese came out with a stunning offer stating that their clocks are guaranteed for 30 long years and slashing the price down to the earth compared to the giants. See, this is a clock which was sold by a Japanese manufacturer, Sikosha. They have marked 30 years guarantee. By seeing the attractive price and extended guarantee period promised by the company, the middle class segment in the Asian market started purchasing Japanese clocks. Also, Japanese captured the entire Indian market. Till the last end of the pendulum clock era, Japanese clocks had a wonderful market and they survived. But they could never enter into the European market. What was the role of our Indian clock traders of those days? Most of you must have heard about the famous clock trader P.R. and Sons, which was started during 1879 by a Britisher, Mr. Peter R. Our Indian traders have requested the foreign manufacturers to emboss their name in the clock's dial, which they have sold. This is the American Sir Thomas clock, which was sold during 1890 by our Indian trader, P.R. and Sons. You may not have heard about the clock traders like E.A. Watch Company, Jalal and Sons, Khader Yusuf Brothers. These clock traders belong to my father's time. Today, they don't exist anymore. They have all shut down their operations long time back. Our upcoming generation will never get a chance to know about these traders or about their products. Clock selling is a dying trade, especially with the advent of e-commerce. You all might be wondering, what am I going to do with this huge collection of clocks? In the world, every parent will hand over their properties and their valuables to their loving children. Like every father, I too love my children. They are here, my daughters are here, watching me. These historical, priceless treasures, definitely not to my children, definitely. I have decided to dedicate all these treasures to our great nation's upcoming generation. At present, India does not have a single museum dedicated for clocks. Before my days, I would like to set up a trust museum specially for clocks. I want these treasures to be preserved forever so that our younger generations will get a chance to learn about the product, also about their stories. I'm still on the lookout for the right place and the right sponsor who is like-minded to set up and establish the museum. At this place, I'm very pleased to share that our collection has been recognized by the Limca Book of Records, and also hopefully we will find a place in the Guinness Book of World Records. Listen to the chiming of these clocks, because time is everything we have and everything we don't have. Thank you and have a great day.